Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story TV and the Her Story podcast. This is Gertrude Matcha here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome back to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Hi, my name is Denise Buzy-Pucheu. I am based in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and I am 61 years old. And I was asked to be on this podcast due to my very interesting background. When I was young, my mom unfortunately passed away of cancer when I was 5 years old. I had a younger brother who was 3, and at the time, a younger sister that was a year and a half. My father had immigrated from France. He was a French chef, and he and my mother had actually met at the age of about 35. They married at 36, and unfortunately, my mom passed away by the time she was 42. My maternal grandmother was also French, and she had come over during 1917. So it turned out that my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and my father raised us. So we lived at that time in Mount Vernon, New York, which was a very blended area. A lot of Italians, a lot of Portuguese, houses very close to one another. Where people could literally scream out the window, and you could hear, we could hear my grandmother screaming to come in for dinner from around the block. And, we were brought up by my grandmother was very religious. She was Roman Catholic. So we did go to parochial school, and we went to, church every Sunday. She was very vigilant about that. And we lived in Mount Vernon up until 7th grade. Or for me, it was 7th grade. My father had gotten a position at the Culinary Institute of America, being a professor in the French culinary arts. So he went up there initially by himself. We stayed with our grandmother. And then when he secured an apartment in a condo, he decided to move us up there. So that was when I was going to be going into 8th grade. And a friend of the family had said to my father, look, I'll come up, I'll stay with you folks. And that way the kids, will have a mother figure, so to speak. They weren't dating, but she was a friend of the family. She'd been a friend of my mother's. So she ended up coming up and staying in the condominium that my father had gotten. Soon after we moved up, we found out that my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And the diagnosis came at around, probably end of September. By mid-December, he was at that point, of course, had been deemed fatal, and that he was terminally ill. The friend of the family at that point decided with my father and with my grandmother that my father would marry her in the hospital to keep the 3 of us together, because my grandmother at that point was too elderly to take care of us by herself. My father died 2 days after my 13th birthday, went into a coma on my birthday, and then died 2 days later. We stayed up in Hyde Park area until the summer, and then moved back down to Westchester County, New York, back to Mount Vernon. At which time my grandmother proceeded to make sure that I went to parochial all-girls school. So that's where I went to school. And I graduated from there, went on to Concordia College. And, as fate would have it, I, had some trials and tribulations during school. I lost a very dear friend of mine to suicide in college, and then started working. And so I started working. I got my own apartment. I ended up getting an apartment with my sister because she was going to school down at FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology. And ultimately, I moved on through various positions. At the age of 31, I started my own company. At that point, I had my own condominium and I was traveling all over the country and actually all over the world at that point. And it took me a number of years and a lot of breakthroughs in therapy to recognize that I really wanted to have a family. And I had been one of those young ladies that didn't want to settle down. I was not one to go off and get married at 20. I wanted to have my own business, and I did achieve that. So by my mid 30s, I was kind of like looking around saying, okay, I've got this really nice business and I have, a lovely apartment and I have dogs, and maybe I should consider dating. That would be like a really good idea. So I started spending some time on matchmaker.com because at that time that was the nouveau way of dating. And I dated on that system for quite a while. I was probably on and off for about 5 years. I did date someone seriously for 2 years on that, and then ultimately met my husband. And my husband was this really kind, sweet, funny. I mean, he still is, but back then we were really kind of cute together. He's shy, and I was the more talkative one. He was working for GE in New York. He was working for NBC. And we met him through matchmaker.com, and he was in New York and I was in Westchester County, which was about 26 minutes away by train. So he came up and we started dating. And about a year in, we decided to get married, and 16 months later, we were married. Right after we were married, we tried to have a child through IVF, and it didn't work. I was 40 years of age at that point, and I had had other gynecological issues prior to that. So we kind of had already decided that if we were to have children, we would be able to adopt. We moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and interestingly enough, I had been eyeballing an agency in Atlanta that had children that they worked with from Kazakhstan. And Kazakhstan had Eurasian children, and my husband is part Chinese and Portuguese and was born in Canada. So I thought, well, gee, they would kind of look like at least like him. So the agency was about a half hour from our home in Atlanta. So by hook or by crook, we met a lot of people from the area in Atlanta that had adopted through this agency and had children from Kazakhstan. So within a year, we then brought home our two eldest children that are now 20 years of age, and the other one is turning 20 in June. So they're 3 months apart. My son Ethan and my daughter Isabella. And then soon after that, I always believe that fate has reasons for different things. We were home about 6 or 8 months, and then right after that, we got transferred back to Connecticut, which was very close to New York. So we were back home. So I always say that the only reason why we went to Atlanta was to adopt our children, that we were led there by the grace of God, if you want to say. So after we were here a couple of years, we ended up getting pregnant a couple different times, and I lost I had several miscarriages, probably about 4 of them. And I went to my husband and I said, I still think there's another little girl that's meant to be in this family. And he looked at me like I thought we were done. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So we started doing a adoption to Taiwan because I felt like, okay, Taiwan, it's only going to be a 1-week event. We'll fly in, we'll be able to bring home the baby, and then we'll be back with our other 2 very quickly. And that was not obviously the plan. We did start doing all the paperwork for Taiwan, but something held me back and I didn't know exactly what it was. But one Saturday night, my brother had come up from New York and he was downstairs watching a movie with my brother. I'm with my husband. And I went on the internet because someone had told me about an agency that handled children with special needs. And I felt, well, maybe an infant at 48 is going to be a little bit hard. Maybe I should look at a child that's a little bit older, maybe a special needs child. And sure enough, my daughter's little face popped up and I took one look at her and then fell madly in love and then started reading her bio and realized that Erin had the same birth date as my brother, who was sitting downstairs watching a movie with my husband. So I felt like this was it. That was our daughter. And I wrote to the agency. And then Sunday morning, they wrote back to me and they said, well, how do I know that you are going to fit, the description of what we need for this child? And I basically turned around and said, we're adoptive parents of 2 children from Kazakhstan. We own our own home. I have my own business. My husband's a GE executive. We meet your financial requirements and we meet your BMI requirements. And my husband is also part Chinese. And they automatically wrote back to me and said, well, we are putting your name down for this child. And if you send in your letter of intent tomorrow, we are holding her for you. And then I left and I went grocery shopping and I put my head down on the steering wheel in the parking lot of the grocery store. And I just kind of burst out like, oh my God, we just adopted a baby from China. So Erin came home to us at 2.5. And she did have a special need, so she still does have a special need, but it was in her leg. Apparently, they must have inoculated her incorrectly. And we drove, up and down to Boston Children's. I can't tell you how many times. And she had a leg in a cast for a very long time. And we've had leg length differences, and we've had all sorts of different things that have gone on with her leg over time. She does wear a lift, but she's a fabulous, fabulous girl that just is a go-getter, and she's just terrific. My other children are wonderful. Each of them are very different. Obviously, they don't share DNA, so we're all pretty different in this house. My son did unfortunately suffer from a bit of attachment disorder from being in an orphanage, from an institution, and he's come a long way. And my daughter Bella is in college. So, little by little, each child has developed well. I mean, we've had to work with different kinds of occupational therapies and different types of therapies for ADHD and different things. But, that's what we signed up for. So that's the story on our children. And we live in Sandy Hook. And unfortunately, for us, our youngest one, Erin, was in 2nd grade during the time of the Sandy Hook shooting. And that was probably one of the most traumatic things I've ever gone through in my life. You think that you live in this quiet, suburban little community, and it erupts into a tragedy that nobody ever really expected. I mean, no one would have ever thought that anyone would attack children in a school. And we lost a lot of children. We lost 20 children and we lost 6 adults. And of the adults, I knew quite a number of them because my other 2 children had been in the school. I was fortunate enough that Ethan and Isabella were now in the intermediary school and were no longer in Sandy Hook. So Erin was the only child in our family that was affected, deeply affected. I mean, both of the other ones were still affected, obviously, but she was in the school at the time. And, as I said, she's a very resilient young lady. It was very hard for our community. I can't even begin to describe when I see other shootings around the country, knowing what our community went through and what the parents that have lost children and the brothers and sisters who have lost siblings, what they all have to go through is just devastating. It devastates a community. There's no one that's left untouched in the community. And there's so many different levels of trauma, from those that lost family members to those that lose friends to the separations that just tend to happen because of the emotions are surrounding the situation. So, we as a family have been through a lot of different kinds of changes. But that I think was probably, and that's probably one of the reasons why I do speak up about various situations such as adoption and school shootings and trauma, because we've seen it from different sides in our family. But especially, the effects of Sandy Hook on our family, like everyone's family in this community. It does mold a lot of what you look at in society, and make you realize, at least I know what I realize and what I hold dear is my family, because that is something that I've grown up wanting, something that I've grown up, loving as best as I possibly can, and building. I think my husband and I did build our family, and we chose to build our family through adoption. So, as I've said to people, the idea of loss of a child to me is just a devastating thing. So, but anyway, so that's my story when it comes down to my story, my family history. And thanks for listening.
Wow. What an incredible life you have led, Denise.
Thank you,
You
darling.
know, a lot of parents don't get to choose their children. I think you were in a very unique position to decide, is it going to be a boy? Is it going to be a girl? What was the
That
most important thing for you?
that's a good one. Well, we really were planning on a boy and a girl. My husband wanted a boy, I wanted a girl. Okay, that was, I mean, we were planning on three. Um, but we were originally planning on a boy and a girl. And then when I had several miscarriages, I felt that Bella needed a sister. I don't know. It was something, because I had a sister. I felt like Isabella needed a sister. So that's how Aaron came about. It was just kind of, I felt that that kind of camaraderie with girls. I don't know. I've kind of like envisioned that when they grow older, they will always be close. Which they are, which I'm really blessed. They are close. They're sisters, and they love one another, and they are close. So that made me really happy. I mean, Ethan's a boy. He just is a boy. He's a guy. They do guy things. I mean, he loves his sisters, but the girls are close. So that was the one thing I was hoping would happen, and it did. So I was really happy about that.
Now, this was a win-win situation for all parties concerned. You had the desire to be a mom. If there is a woman who's listening to this podcast who's struggling to have a child, what advice would you give? 3 nuggets of wisdom about adoption and why to adopt.
3 nuggets of wisdom. Okay. Review your agency really, really well. Decide if you're going to do domestic adoption or you're going to do international adoption, because there's differences in both. And domestic, for the most part, there's ways of going about whether you want to adopt an infant or whether you want to adopt through foster care. So you have to really look at what is it that is the most comfortable thing for your family. And I mean that. You have to really research it. And if you want infant adoption and you want to have that child from the very, very beginning of life, then that is the route that you should take. If you are planning on adopting or doing foster to adopt, you really need to be prepared for that, as most of these children are coming from difficult family situations, and they could already have some level of trauma. And also, the road to adoption may be a little bit more difficult if the parental rights are not are still involved. International adoption, that you have to look again at the type of programs, the longevity of the adoption agency, and their record, and definitely contact people who have worked with them, contact other agencies that, that are either not so much affiliated with them, but other agencies that may be doing home studies or other things that have worked with that agency. So that's like my first like big nugget. Second one is recognize that there is quite a bit of money that goes into this. It's not an inexpensive proposition. So, be ready to fundraise if you're not prepared to adopt. We were older, we did have the finances to do it. We also saved a bunch of airline points and hotel points and used them on everything we possibly could. We had airfare to China for free. We stayed at the Ritz-Carlton for free. We stayed at, oh my God, the Hilton for free. We we got a GE rate at another location in China. So believe me, use those points, save us up as much as you can, and put a kitty together for the family members who want to help you. And then thirdly, really meet up with other parents that have already adopted from the way that you want to adopt, whether it be adoption, as infants, whether you want to adopt through foster care, or if you've done international adoption. Make sure that you meet with families that have already successfully brought home children so that you can ask them all the pertinent questions that you need to ask them. It's really important to do your research. I'm a research queen. I believe in research, and I'm very glad I did. Our first adoption went very, very, very smoothly. Our second adoption, I did most of the work myself. The agency was very hands-off, but I had already been through an adoption, and China's pretty easy. I mean, I don't want to say pretty easy, but it's pretty formatted. So it was much smoother than even our Kazakhstan adoption, but we had great attorneys in Kazakhstan at the time. So those are my three huge nuggets.
Fantastic. Now, motherhood is challenging. It doesn't matter whether you adopt a child. It doesn't matter whether you give birth to them biologically. It is a challenge. What have you found to be the biggest challenge for you as a mother?
The truth of the matter is, we can try to have it all, but we don't really all have it all. Let's put it this way. We don't all have it all together all the time. It just doesn't happen. I think the biggest challenge for me has been working with trauma, honestly, working with childhood trauma. And that has been pretty much in having had a child, my son, who did have issues coming out of the orphanage. And we've had to learn to work with that. And that's something that, even though I don't even want to say the agency prepared us, nobody really prepares you for this. You just have to be able to go and look and delve deeply. I think this is even with parents of biological children, that they have to look beyond their own self. It's not about you, it's about your child. So if you feel that your child may be a slow reader, it could be some form of dyslexia. If you feel that your child has, ADD or ADHD, it's always good to go that extra mile and just find out. I've always been like that. I don't look at my children as anything but individuals. I never looked at them as a reflection of myself. I mean, in terms of saying please, thank you, and being a kind person, yes. But in terms of their abilities, they all work at their own speed and their own level. The only thing that we can do as parents is try to promote, healthy learning and be able to help them if they have certain educational issues or, learning disabilities, which I did find that my children did have. So, the 504s and getting IEPs and all the things that you need to do in the schools, these are things that you just need to go and delve into and do. That's what your job is. You're a parent. You do.
Fantastic. Now, let me teleport you into the future.
Okay.
Actually, no, before we get to that one, things that parents who want to adopt should be aware of before they go into adoption. especially with a child, what kind of issues can come up, etc.?
There's a lot. I mean, I'll be really honest. I'm not, I don't sugarcoat anything. So I have spoken in front of a number of adoptive parents or wannabe adoptive parents, and especially for children that are coming out of foster care, especially for any child that you're going to adopt, it's always good to have as much medical history as humanly possible. Um, we did have history. I mean, was able to reach out to um, my son's birth mother, and she gave me as much history as she possibly could. We actually did the searches ourselves. I found her online on a Russian website, and then got a translator to go and contact her and translate. We went back and forth a couple times. With my daughter Isabella's mom, birth mother, we did hire an agent to go out and find her. We did do a hair DNA test, and I did get pictures of the birth mother and her sister. We did come to find out that there was some level of depression with the birth mother. So we knew about that. We found that my daughter had cross-eyed when she was young. Her eyes started crossing. There were certain different kind of things with her eyes that were apparently hereditary that we had to fix. So now she's back to wearing glasses. She had to do eye patches. Then she had some sort of a nerve issue in her eye that was apparently hereditary that we never knew about. With children in orphanages and institutions, there is the potential of them having some level of trauma, not being held, not being touched. All of that does lead to a kind of a survival mentality on the part of the child. So those are the types of things that you have to be very aware of and study up on, because it is something that's going to affect your life. I mean, it is part of their DNA, and it's helping them get through that trauma, that's going to make them a whole person. So that's something that does encapsulate your life. I'm not going to lie. It's something that you really do have to understand, and you really do have to work with them on it. Let's see what else. I think those are, those and any kind of medical issues. I mean, with my daughter from China, we haven't done a DNA testing to go and try to find her birth mother. I know she wants to do that. We will probably do that. China is just a little bit more difficult. We know with uh, Kazakhstan, they had one particular group that everybody went to, and they located Isabella's birth mother in 2 weeks. So it was very easy for us. But I really do think that as much medical history, as much background history, mental health history that you can get on birth parents, this is very important stuff for you to have. Very important.
Wow. That is a wealth of information you've helped us with today. Thank you so much for
Oh, you're
that.
so welcome.
So now let's go into the future. You're 100 years old. You're
I
now
love you.
sitting
I love you,
rocking.
but I hope I don't get that old. Okay, go ahead.
You're in your rocking chair, surrounded by your children, your grandchildren, and great grandchildren.
Yes, ma'am.
If you could go and have a conversation with this future woman, based on how you've lived your life, what would you say to her?
I really have no regrets. There's nothing. I've lived a very full life. I think that I mean, as long as they're all healthy and happy, I've lived a very good life. I really have. I've done a lot of what I want to do. I want to travel more, but other than that, you know, if I live to be 100 and I still have all my cookies upstairs, I'll be a happy woman. I'm a happy woman now. So, I mean, I hope to be equally happy at 100.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. Denise, it's such a pleasure to reconnect with you.
It is a pleasure here as well, my dear.
Thank you for sharing your family, your life story with us today. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. There's so many children in the world that need love.
Very true.
And if you're struggling to have a biological child, do consider adoption. It is a gift to both
Absolutely.
you and the child. Yeah. I'll be back again tomorrow with yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And Denise, thanks again for the interview.
Thank you
Bye
so
for
much.
now, everybody.
Bye bye.